get started, just so we don't run out of time. I think there are still people joining, but yeah, I want to make sure we stay on schedule. Hello to everyone. Welcome to our event, Restless Women, looking at how we achieve an equal future. So nice to have you all here today. I think we have attendees from all over the world, which is really exciting. I want to take this opportunity to say Happy International Women's Day, even though it's not until Monday. It's obviously a day to celebrate the incredible women around the world, but also it's a time to think about how much we do still have to do, how much progress there is still to be made. The World Economic Forum predicts that at the current rate of progress, we actually have 256 years until we'll close the gap on women's economic equality. Women obviously continue to be underrepresented in decision-making spaces, and the pandemic has increased rates of gender-based violence and domestic abuse, with some countries reporting a 30% increase over the last year. Today, we're going to be hearing some incredible perspectives on what are the most important enablers for a truly equal world from women who are leading the fight. I am going to hand over shortly to our wonderful host, Edleen, who's going to introduce the event properly. But first, I just wanted to go through a couple of things. Please, could you all just turn your microphones off so that we don't have any background noise? And also, it would be good just for this bit if we could turn our cameras off. We are expecting quite a few participants, and we just want to make sure that the sort of connection is good. Hopefully, we won't stumble across any tech issues today, but you never know. The event will be recorded, and also excitingly today, we are also streaming to Facebook Live. Please put any questions that you have in the chat for the speakers. We're hoping to have some time at the end during our live Q&A to answer these questions. So you can either pop those in the chat, or if you don't feel comfortable, send them to me or anyone called Restless Development. And finally, I did just kind of want to preface this event with a bit of a trigger warning, and we will be discussing a couple of themes and issues that some attendees might find distressing, such as FGM and gender-based violence. So of course, please step away if you need to at any point. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Edleen, who's our brilliant host today. Edleen is a multi-award winning diversity, inclusion, belonging and culture expert, speaker and consultant, and currently works as the International Corporate Affairs and Co-Partner for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Director at the FA, and sits as a trustee on our International Board at Restless Development, as well as being involved with many other different things. And we're really thrilled to have her join us today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Edleen.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Holly, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Really delighted to be able to be here today and to host this event for Restless. So in terms of, I suppose, a bit about my background. So as Holly has said, a lot of my work at the moment is specifically in the equality, diversity and inclusion space. I've had a kind of interesting background where I started off working as an investment banker. I've worked in corporate broking and in the insurance industry, and I've then also done a suite of roles across the HR spectrum before moving into consultancy and now into the world of sport, which was one I never thought I would be entering into. In terms of how I came about engaging with Restless, my family are originally from Sierra Leone in West Africa, and I was delighted and excited one day upon stumbling upon Restless Development's website to see the great work happening in that location, and really recognizing that for me, what sets Restless apart from many other organizations is that youth are at the heart of everything that you do. And being somebody who likes to consider myself within the youth cohort, for me, that was a passion and an alignment that I felt was a real key point for me to say I would love to engage with the organization and become the international trustee. So really delighted to be here today and excited to be talking about what are key critical issues, both on a personal and professional level. As Holly's already mentioned, of course, Monday sees the mark of International Women's Day, and so we're taking the opportunity today to discuss how we can achieve an equal future, and we'll be hearing some different perspectives from women across the world within Restless Development who have been leading on gender issues in their own way. On a personal level, what gender equality means to me is making sure that across all of the spectrum spectrums of society and life, that we're able to provide equality of opportunity and equality of access, be that from education to health, from workplaces to broader societal support. So for me, it's about making sure that we remove the structural and societal barriers that are often in place that means that women don't get the same access to opportunities and frankly, in many ways, the same equal start to life. As a female myself, and as somebody also from a Black heritage and a West African background, of course, we also want to recognise that, as is the case with many issues and challenges in the equality, diversity and inclusion space, we have to also recognise the importance of intersectional identities and the fact that actually that adds a different element and often a different layer of challenge, discrimination or disadvantage. And hopefully we're going to have a chance to talk about some of those issues in our conversation today. Without further ado, because today is not about me, I want to give us a quick intro to one of our first panelists, Natalie. So Natalie is one of Restless Development's 12 youth power panelists who are organising the biggest youth generation in history to make the world a better place. Natalie is also the founder of Mishana Empowerment Courier, a women-led community-based organisation supporting vulnerable girls through safe spaces, mentorship and skills workshops. Natalie has been a girls' and women's rights activist for most of a decade, running community dialogues, public rallies and marches to really raise awareness of and end violence and discrimination against girls. And so with that, I'm going to hand over and introduce Natalie by playing a short video.
Hello, my name is Natalie Robi. I am from Kenya. I'm very passionate about girls' rights and the intersectional issues of gender, young people, and interested in work around gender equality and reducing inequalities. I am the founder of Msichana Empowerment Courier, a girls and young women-led non-profit organization working in rural Kenya to advance the rights of girls. And within the courier community that we work in, we are advancing the rights of girls to be free against female genital mutilation. I am also a youth power panelist with Restless Development and the Global Youth Partnership. And in this video, I'm really going to talk about my experience as a gender equality advocate and what that means. And as we are looking at International Women's Day, what should be our aspirations as advocates, as government, as communities. So my journey began, and mostly my journey, as you'll find out, has been influenced by Restless Development. I became an activist when I was 19 years old, and I didn't know that I was an activist then, because for me it was just a matter of helping the girls in my community. So just to share or just to give a background why this was important to me. For every girl that is born in my community, chances are that she'll be mutilated, and she'll be mutilated so that she'll be told that she'll bring honor to the community, she'll bring honor to her family. So what happens is that when female genital mutilation is performed on girls, which is the cutting of a girl's genitalia for non-medical reasons, it's from the word go, it disempowers the girls. And for me, I knew that I needed to speak out, because somebody held my hand when I was a young girl and I wasn't mutilated, and I needed to make sure that other girls like me had an opportunity to live and thrive. I met Restless Development when I was back in 2015. I was a very ambitious young girl who wanted to make a difference, and Restless Development, through the Youth Accountability Advocates Project at that time and at the Youth Power Campaign, was able to guide me and mold me and to just help me to be able to advocate for these issues on a higher level. And what that has been able to do is that it has raised the voices of young people, particularly young women across the globe, so that our voices are not left out and the plight of girls in our communities are not left out as well. Right now, in my role as the Youth Power Panelist, I am able to do that at an even higher level by mobilizing young people around gender equality, which is Sustainable Development Goal 5, so that we can hold our government accountable. We are able to critique the systems that are not supporting the empowerment of girls and women. And what does gender equality mean for me? Gender equality means that every girl who is born in my community and other communities will be able to have an equal chance to life. And what I mean is that they'll be able to have an opportunity to go to school. They'll be able to have, they'll be able to live free of discrimination. And how do we achieve this? There are several ways we can achieve this. One of the ways is, for instance, one of the ways that that disempowers girls and young women is by being forced to undergo female genital mutilation. And female genital mutilation is embedded in gender norms, is embedded in harmful social norms, which expose the inequalities that exist in communities. So one of the things we can do to make sure that we achieve gender equality is by ending female genital mutilation. And how do we do that? One of the ways that I've been able to share across the various platforms I've been part of is we need to put girls at the center of interventions of ending female genital mutilation. This is why. When a girl grows up, she is told that when FGM is performed on her, she's bringing honor to the community. But when girls understand that what is happening to them is violence, it is sexual abuse, then they're able to stand up for themselves. And we have seen this as the most sustainable option. Take an example of me. I grew up in a community that believed that, cutting a girl is the right thing to do. But then on and on, as I learned that what is happening is not right, it is injustice, I was able to stand up. And I'm now mobilizing thousands of girls in my community to stand up against the cut. And once we address, female genital mutilation and the other intersectional issues, that for me is one sure way of achieving gender equality. As government, as organizations, how can we do that? There are incredible young people across our communities who are already addressing some of these problems. And the only thing they need from us is to hold their hands. So, what must we do to achieve an equal future? I think for us is believing already that an equal future is possible. Right now we are celebrating International Women's Day, and we are looking at the number of strides that have been made to achieve gender equality. But so many women, especially now in the context of COVID-19, have been left behind. So we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to go back to the grassroots where we're seeing a lot more in terms of innovation, but also a lot more in the inequalities that are being exposed. So let us go back to the communities, and let us take it as our collective duty, because gender equality is not something fancy. It's actually a human right, because as a girl, if I know that I have an opportunity to thrive, then that's justice. It is not a favor that we are doing to girls. And I'm really grateful because my journey to be an advocate has been inspired by Restless Development and all the opportunities that they're able to give to young women like me across the continent. And how how we're able to explore this is by having opportunities to speak at high level platforms, being able to be part of campaigns and mobilize campaigns. And I'm really glad that this year we're able to share this platform and talk about our experiences as young women or women who are working with some of these incredible organizations. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So it's me speaking again. I think the host, you need to enable me to use my video again, but I will carry on talking in the interim. Thank you so much to Natalie for sharing her perspective and her view there. There were 4 key themes that I just jotted down listening to that passionate speech around the importance of giving women a voice and a platform to speak, about the real importance of empowerment and community engagement to help drive change, about education and making sure that actually you're engaging with people from a young age to change the world that we live in today, and also the critical element of allyship. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our second speaker. So Sarojini joined Restless Development in India in January 2020 as an assistant program coordinator, measuring the impact of our India programs. She is the youngest member of India Hub's leadership team, and she's passionate about highlighting how gender gaps in data are hindering progress for women in India. She supports all of the India Hub's programs to make their program design and impact measurement more inclusive and accessible for women. So with that, let's hear from a short video from Sarojini.
My name is Sarojini Sapru, and I work at Restless Development India at our Delhi office as an assistant program coordinator for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Essentially, what this includes is day-to-day monitoring of our programs, as well as periodic check-ins and evaluations to see what's working, what isn't, what we're learning, and how we can translate those learnings into effective programmatic adaptations. The past year has been tumultuous and has disrupted the status quo. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the already existing structural inequalities and challenges. Through the learnings gathered from our monitoring and evaluation activities over the past year, as a hub that directly implements programs and works with communities, the pandemic has fundamentally altered the way in which we envision programs, the manner in which we implement them, and more broadly, the way in which we conceive of development at all. Take the example of our MTV Nishedh program, a program in partnership with the MTV Staying Alive Foundation. The program implemented a curriculum on sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, with 8,850 young people between the ages of 16 to 25 in 3 districts of Rajasthan, a state in Western India. The program was initially designed to be implemented offline, with peer-to-peer session delivery conducted by trained volunteers in schools and colleges. As COVID hit and as lockdown regulations were imposed across the country, the program was adapted to fit online implementation. What this meant, we soon realized, was that the curriculum was being imparted to a higher percentage of boys, and that the population that we were reaching was not as gender inclusive as we would have hoped. Particularly, we noticed challenges in mobilizing and engaging with girls in the 16 to 18 age group, those who were supposed to be in school. Why? Our sessions were online. This meant that in order to attend sessions, young people needed access to devices, mobile data, some amount of technological literacy, and privacy. And I say privacy very deliberately. It's not something that would perhaps immediately spring to mind as a requirement, but as we found out, it was a very important resource that young people wanted, needed, and required to be part of a program that focused on a topic like sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR. A topic like SRHR, which is still across the world and in India surrounded by stigma and taboo. A topic that, as it became clear, was not something that young people, particularly girls, felt comfortable talking about in spaces that were not safe spaces for them, where their families could listen into the topics that were being discussed: contraception, abortion, general SRHR wellness. And as a result, they were self-censoring, not engaging fully, and oftentimes dropping out. These learnings that we were grappling with through the course of this program was also substantiated by independent research that our hub conducted on the impact of COVID-19 on young people's psychosocial health in India. This survey, which included respondents from across the country, highlighted the impact of the pandemic on young people and women as being systematic, deep, and disproportionate. What we found was that over a quarter of respondents who were accessing counseling and psychiatric help before the pandemic lost access to these services after the lockdown was imposed. This loss of access was disproportionately felt by younger populations and female respondents. Key findings from the survey also shone light on the manner in which lack of access to technology and devices further challenged accessibility to information, services, and products. The digital divide, or the technology gap, is the difference between groups with access to technology and those without. The digital divide is particularly pronounced for women. That is, women and girls are less likely around the world to have access to technology. Access to the internet in India remains a largely male-dominated space, with on average only a third of users being female. And India alone accounts for nearly 50% of the gender digital divide in the world. Without access to technology and the internet, girls and women are not able to equally participate in our ever more digital societies. Holding back girls and women in this area affects every aspect of their lives, including their ability to speak out and campaign on issues that affect them. One of the programs that Restless Development India works on is STEM for Girls. Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. The program, in partnership with IBM and Quest Alliance, is an attempt to address the fact that across India, only 14% of scientists, engineers, and technologists are women, substantially lower than the global 28%. Acknowledging that over 80% of jobs in the next decade will require STEM capabilities in some capacity, the program hopes to build awareness and tech capabilities of school-going girls on the importance of STEM, and also sensitizes the ecosystem that they're operating in, school teachers, parents, male peers, and community members. In many parts of the world, the first response to COVID-19 was unprecedented lockdowns. Educational institutions were one of the first to be closed. A UNESCO report suggests that the lockdown of schools in India affected 320 million children, out of which an estimated 158 million were female students. This is alarming. In such a scenario, the digital and online medium offered a pathway for providing continuous educational content and ensuring uninterrupted learning at home. But for most adolescent girls, this pathway has remained either completely barred or only partially open. An adolescent girl who met this challenge head-on is Sonali. She's 15 years old and hails from Ganjam, a district in Orissa in the eastern part of the country. Her father is a driver, her mother is a homemaker, she has one younger brother. Agriculture and daily wage labor are the main sources of income in her village. When the pandemic hit, incomes were affected. Many families, unable to afford school fees, needed help supplementing their incomes. They withdrew their children from school, and these children went on to start working and support their families. Sonali, a passionate learner, is one amongst few who was able to remain enrolled and continue her education. Inspired by her studies, inspired by her relationships with the peer educators implementing the curriculum in her school, and her desire to act, Sonali reached out to students in her community, those who were no longer able to continue their schooling, and set up a learning space, one where she began conducting classroom sessions on English, STEM, and other topics, to continue to foster the spirit of learning. In a space where digital learning is challenging, Sonali's story highlights innovation and community. These are the stories that inspire, and this is the data that matters. So what is gender equality? What does gender equality mean to me? And how can we achieve an equal future? Gender equality means many things. Principally, in my opinion, it means the overhauling of a status quo that seeks through both overt and discrete structural mechanisms and day-to-day interactions to hold back a significant portion of the global population. The pandemic has disrupted irrevocably the status quo, a status quo that was unequal to begin with. It has highlighted the existing inequalities and exacerbated them. We need to acknowledge this impact as we move forward and build an equal world, one that is intersectional and manifests action beyond theory, a world that is not willing, as Sarah Ahmed would say, to get over histories that are not over. How our world is shaped is through memory. Memory created through the information that we collect and that we share, through data. We need to know more, we need more data, we need more gender-inclusive data. However, I think oftentimes when we think of data that matters, data that is impactful, and data that has the power to change, we focus on quantitative data, big picture statistics. This is important, but data is not just statistics. Data is also human, stories, people, and narratives. A gender-equal world acknowledges that change and impact is driven by people and communities. And people are more than and beyond statistics. A gender-equal world looks at measuring progress more innovatively, compassionately, and holistically.
Fantastic. Brilliant. I think my video is just coming back on now. great to have that insight that's just been shared with us. So a couple of key themes to draw out from what we've just heard: the critical elements and the importance of data to drive forward moving along the agenda as it relates to gender equality. Also, the importance of access to information. You know, we heard there about individuals who don't have access to an increasingly digitized world due to minimization of their access. And so the importance of that as it relates to driving things forward and being a contributory part of society is really critical and really key if we want to make that change. And then the final thing that I picked up was actually the importance of data beyond statistics and numerical elements. So the key rationale and notion for making sure that we hear the human stories, we understand the human interaction, and we really understand the experiences of individuals to help us devise strategies, initiatives, and innovation to move gender equality further forward. I'm really looking forward to our discussion later today. Our final panelist that I'm going to introduce is Gemma. So Gemma is a business director at Restless Development, and earlier this year, she co-led the agency with her colleague Kate whilst our CEO was out on parental leave. Gemma has 2 young daughters and lives in London, and she's worked for 15 years in the international development sector, always with a focus on fundraising and partnerships. Over the past few years, Gemma has been learning about inclusive and feminist leadership and trying, failing, and learning about what this means to her and to others in the practice. She's part of the Wild Research Group. I'm delighted to hear Gemma's experience and stories now in a short video too.
Hello, I'm Gemma Graham. I'm Business Director at Restless Development, responsible for our fundraising and partnerships work. I've been committed to international development for nearly 17 years now, with a focus on the rights of women and girls. And in more recent years, I've been learning about feminist and inclusive leadership. I'm also a mum to 2 young daughters, Freya and Xenia. The theme of today's event is Restless Women, How Do We Achieve an Equal Future? And I've been invited to share with you my personal experience of co-leading Restless Development with my colleague, Kate Mwezi, last year. So in 2020, for 3 months, whilst our Chief Executive, Perry Maddox, was on parental leave, Restless Development decided to do something a little different with the cover role. We had been learning about models of inclusive leadership, and we decided to test a co-leadership approach where 2 roles share the accountability for being the chief executive. How does this link to today's topic, you might be thinking? Well, in the UK, charities, actually 70% of the staff are women, but 70% of the chief executives and the board chairs are men. Feminist and inclusive leadership models, like a co-lead approach, are one way of redressing the power imbalance and achieving a more equal future. Restless Development is part of the WILD Action Research Group. The WILD stands for Women in Leadership in International Development, and this group is conducting research over the last 2 years to look at what barriers and enablers there are to women becoming chief executives of charities that are working internationally. Kate and my co-leadership experience features as a case study as part of this work, and the report will be out in the summer. To demonstrate the impact that inclusive feminist leadership can have, I wanted to share my own personal story with you today, and also the impact that the sharing of the story and the experience from Kate and myself has had on our colleagues, friends and family. Over 9 years ago, I joined Restless Development after spending a few years living in Vietnam. It was quite a big change to move back to London, and I've been reflecting on my career ambitions during the job search. On my first day in my fantastic new job at Restless Development, I wrote a note to myself, which I still have. And that note says, "One day I want to be chief executive of an organisation I believe in and that believes in me." So I know from this note that 28-year-old Gemma had the ambition of being a chief executive. But something changed along the way, and I no longer saw being a chief exec as a possibility. I had my first daughter, Freya, in 2015, and I had a bit of an identity crisis now that I look back at it. Maternity leave was was good for me. It had all the ups and downs that a maternity leave, can have. But I came back to work in a good place. But I came back to work trying to be exactly the same as I was before, as if nothing had changed. And yet, nearly everything in my life had actually changed. And looking back at this time, nobody that I knew, friends or colleagues, was really talking about this issue of the return to work and the impact it might have on bringing together of the two worlds of being a mother and a senior leader. And to make things a little bit more intense, I also applied for a more senior position within Restless Development to cover the COO role for 12 months as a parental leave cover. Now, looking back on this, I feel I did a good job in the role itself, but what really knocked my confidence and took away the ambition that I'd had to be a chief executive one day was the impact it had had on my family and me and those elements of life. So if we fast forward 2 years from there to 2017, I was expecting our second baby that turned out to be our lovely daughter Xenia. And this time around, I wanted to change things. And also, I felt the world had changed. There'd been the introduction in the UK of shared parenting leave by the government. And I also decided to seek out a mentor through the Aspire Foundation, who provides a free mentor-mentee matching service that's all about empowering women. And I worked with this mentor on return to work planning. And as we did this, we considered me as my whole self, as a mum, as a leader, as the Gemma who likes French food and watches sci-fi and reads books and has time to see her family and friends. And this is where my feminist and inclusive leadership journey really began. I did things very differently on this second return to work, and I felt empowered by it, and I was very vocal about it. And in doing so, I heard from others and realised that this was a common experience across women leaders in the UK. And it's part of the reason that 70% of the staff who are women don't end up being in the top jobs as the chief execs or the board chairs. But even as this journey and these realisations, came to me, I was still very timid about the idea of one day being a chief exec. And what gave me the confidence back to have that ambition once again was the co-leadership experience. It was transformational for me on that front, even though it was short term and even though it was at the worst possible moment as the global pandemic really hit and was a time of crisis. The experience still made that difference personally to me in restoring my confidence, being a mother and a senior leader. So Kate covered the COO internal side of the business, and I covered the deputy chief exec external focused side of the business, and together we co-led the agency for a few months. During this time, we lent on each other, we fully trusted each other, and we took an explicitly inclusive and feminist approach as we navigated the crisis. What this meant was taking our egos out of the picture as leaders. It meant prioritising well-being and self-care of ourselves and others over other things. It meant truly collective accountability and transparent and accountable decision-making. And we remained committed to capturing our experience of doing this role because it was a test for Restless Development to see how it would work and what impact it might have for others. And it was also going to be captured as a case study as part of the wild research. Kate and I were very good at keeping each other accountable and sort of keeping this focus that we'd promised on our vulnerability and real experiences. And so we captured our story. We did this through video interviews that were recorded and shared with staff, as well as Q&A sessions at workshops. And we also made a podcast as part of our experience, which features in the wild research as a case study. We shared our losses, we shared our failures, we shared our strengths and successes and how we'd learnt and built up resilience through this process. I don't think we did anything particularly special during this time, but the response to the sharing about the experience was quite overwhelming. We got emails, WhatsApp messages, voicemails from colleagues, from peers, from friends, and even family members who'd seen some of these materials, and they weren't getting in touch to say anything about, having done the job of being chief executive or around that. They were getting in touch because something emotionally resonated with them about our story and our experience. Some of the messages were incredibly emotional that came from people, and some of them were from young female colleagues who shared with us that never before had they seen themselves as able to be chief executives, but from hearing how Kate and I had spoken and shared about it and seen the approach we'd taken, they now felt that they could be. Receiving these messages was really, very, very, very humbling for Kate and I. And reflecting on it today, I think that our experience, it spoke to a common experience of gender inequality. I think we challenged something, a gender norm around being mothers of young children, which Kate and I both are, and being senior leaders of the organisation. So, tying all of this back to the theme for today of how we might achieve an equal future, for me, women's leadership is at the heart of the answer. Leadership of our own rights and opportunities, leadership of organisations, leadership of countries, and leadership on the world stage. So I'd like to just end by sharing a reflection that's come from my eldest daughter, Freya, who recently turned 6, on the topic of co-leadership.
Hello, Mummy's Work. I'm here to say that me and my friend Victoria want to be Prime Ministers together and share it. Thank you. Bye.
How delightful to have that round off from lovely Freya. That was beautiful. And again, Gemma touched on so many key themes for us to discuss. Role models and the importance of role models and the impact of seeing co-leadership within the organisation. And clearly a fantastic role model for Freya too, who's aiming to be a Prime Minister, which I think is wonderful. Recognising the importance of equity within organisations. So recognising that we're not always going to be providing the same solutions for everybody. Sometimes it might be a co-leadership role. Sometimes it might be flexible working. Sometimes it might be remote working. There are multiple options to support people within organisations and indeed within broader society to look at alternative mechanisms to get something done in an effective way. And the final point I just wanted to flag and highlight is the importance of intersectionality, which I think came out really strong across what it was that Gemma was sharing with us. So with that, I'd now like to open up the floor to some questions, not only from the audience, and I'm going to get kick-started. And Gemma, I think I'm going to come to you first, actually. So we know that gender equality needs to be fully inclusive in order for everyone to feel equal and to feel like they can contribute. But how can we ensure that we are addressing intersectional barriers as we progress towards achieving an equal future?
Thanks, Edleen. I think, firstly, just to acknowledge that gender intersects with pretty much everything. So all aspects of our identities. So, thinking of age, sexuality, race, class, religion, all aspects that there can be. And so it's absolutely vital that we acknowledge power and privilege and how it's affected by these different aspects of identity. Otherwise, there will be no way that we achieve an equal future by focusing on gender alone or on any one of those single aspects alone.
Thank you, Gemma. And Sarojini, I'd like to hear your perspective on that question and the importance of how we look to embed intersectionality in our approach to tackle gender equality.
Hi, so I'd just like to say thank you first. This has just been I think hearing all hearing the conversations today has just been really exciting, and has also just like prompted some thoughts. So I'm really excited to kind of answer this question, keeping that in mind, like after Natalie and Gemma's amazing videos. I think something that I've been thinking about in terms of an intersectionality very specifically has been kind of going back to the conversation of data, because that's what I was talking about in my video, is this idea that data has the power to amplify, because I think some of the statistics that I shared were really alarming, and like they were there for effect in order to like capture attention. But I think data also has the power to invisibilize and to erase. And I think when we talk about intersectionality, when we look at statistics, we have to be mindful of the fact that I think data erases. So like when we look at census data, for example, it invisibilizes the trans community completely, because there's no space for gender identity aside from biological sex to be in our census data and things like that. So I think when we put out surveys, when we look at gathering information, we need to really focus on who we want information from, the stories that matter, and kind of creating designs that take those into account and work to create designs that are more holistic and like take those gaps into account that would come when we're just, instead of like disseminating a survey online that would just reach a very specific population and tell us probably exactly what we need to hear, but not be as inclusive as it could be. So I think that's something that I'd like to plug right now in response to your question.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And Natalie, I'm keen to get your insights as well, and to bring in some of the cultural elements that you discussed in your video and the impact of that from an intersectional standpoint.
Thank you very much. And I would also like to appreciate the contributions from Gemma, and also just pick up from where Sarojini left. And she's bringing a very important perspective, and apologies for the background noise behind me. She's bringing a very important perspective on how sometimes some of the people who we are speaking about could be invisible. And in this sense, for example, I'll give an example on what on some of the issues that we work on. For instance, the women in the various communities could, potentially perform something like, or support child marriage, not as something that they really want, but it's because it's as a result of so many other things. And this is where I see the intersectionality of the various issues that contribute to gender inequality come in. For example, something like child marriage. A woman would give up her daughter to get married simply because they have no food at home. And that particular dowry that would come in will sort of maybe cover some of the costs that they have at home. And then if we address child marriage as just a standalone issue, we are missing out on some of the issues that contribute to, to the problem being persistent in communities. Something like leadership in communities. In some communities, they believe that a woman would never stand before men. And how do we do that? How do we contribute to making sure that, we analyze and look at some of the issues around gender inequalities in our communities, and also bring the other aspects of data and women in the spaces of leadership, as Gemma has spoken about. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Natalie. And a key sort of follow-up question from that is, we've talked about the importance of data, we've talked about the importance of engaging in communities, but one of the questions that I really want to pose, and it's one that I think has come up also through the audience questions, is what is the role of allyship or men as it relates to creating increased gender equality across the globe? And Gemma, I'm going to come to you first again on this one. What is their role? How can they help?
So to take it back, I think to the examples that I was talking about in the video. So if we're talking about women's leadership in the workplace, for example, I think the other side of the coin with equality in the workplace is equality in family and equality in parenting. And until we have equality for men in parenting and a supportive, enabling environment, and the change in attitudes also needed to really enable that to be a truly equal partnership, then we will never achieve the gender equality on the workplace side of things. So I think it's really about seeing those things together, and also seeing that it's a justice issue for for male parents as well as women. It's really a whole piece to be looked at together, or it won't end up equal in either space.
Fantastic. And Natalie, I would want to come to you next on that question, because I know you talked about some of the challenges again in your video with cultural perceptions of the role of a female versus the role of a male. So what do you think is the role that men can play?
Thank you for that question. And I think this allows us to reflect further. And I would say, for me, it's our collective responsibility. So a collective responsibility to ensure that girls and women and every other person lives a dignified life. And some of the issues that have contributed to gender inequality take that away from girls and women and other marginalized groups. So, for example, in most of our communities, we find men are able to either in positions of leadership. So I see the role of men as allowing women, or allowing this marginalized group to come and have conversations with them. And in some cases, it's not been easy. For example, when you're talking about women taking up leadership positions, you'd find it's become tougher and tougher because the community still believes that men need to take leadership. So for the men who are in such spaces, they need to understand that it's only right, just like Gemma said, it's just justice that men contribute and support the collective action to realize gender equality in the various spaces, right from home to community to national spaces and even to global spaces.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. And building on that, Sarojini, I'd like to ask you, when we've talked about leadership across a couple of questions now. So what does leadership mean and look like to you as it relates to gender equality?
Yeah, I think leadership means looking at someone, and I think good leadership means looking at someone and being able to visualize yourself in their position. I think it's really important, like Gemma said, to kind of have important role models to look up to, important mentors, important spaces where when you enter a space, you can see the leader, like they're compassionate, they're exciting, they're innovative, they listen to you, and you can see yourself wanting to be a leader in that space and knowing that that's an option and knowing that that's a possibility. So I think that's what good leadership is just making sure everyone, whether or not they're in a leadership space, knows that they can be leaders and knows that leadership is an option for them and that we are all in our own spaces leaders.
Great. And Gemma, I'd like to pose that question to you because I'm really interested to know if your perception changed as it related to what leadership meant when you moved into the kind of co-lead role versus what you were doing before.
Absolutely. So I think there's one thing between reading and learning about something, which I had been doing over the past couple of years, learning more about feminist and inclusive leadership, especially through my involvement with the Wild Group, as I'd mentioned, and actually trying to put that into practice whilst holding, co-holding the top spot in an organisation. And it was a crisis when the the pandemic first hit and lockdowns really started coming into place. So it really was quite different. And I always like to talk about trying, failing, learning, and having that failing word in the journey, because it definitely happens as you try to take new approaches in your leadership style, and you need to learn and adapt to that along the way. So I certainly did.
Great. Another question from me, in addition to the importance of data, which we've talked about, where you are engaging with individuals who perhaps are not bought in as it relates to this gender equality journey, or indeed the importance of gender equality, how can you find alternative ways to really make sure that the voices of people are elevated and the importance of this topic and driving it forward is truly heard? Sarojini, I'm going to come to you first. So minus data, what else?
I feel like that's such an important question, because that's kind of like the kickstart to the conversation that we need to have. Like the answer is kind of kickstarting this conversation. The answer is starting to look beyond traditional ways of sharing stories, beyond traditional ways of saying this is an effective story, and this is the story that we're going to listen to. I think it means being radical about like the ways in which we imagine progress more generally. I think particularly when we're in the development sector, there is an idea of the stories that that are impactful, or of the stories that work, and how we narrate certain things. But I think we kind of have to move past that and really like talk about development is about people, development is about communities, and that amplification oftentimes comes directly from the communities itself. It doesn't have to necessarily be from this outside top-down approach. So I think one of the ways in which we can really amplify community voices is having communities amplify their own voices and like listen to the voices of communities, because those voices exist, those voices are loud, those voices are there. It's just we need to acknowledge that they have always been there, and that we need to change what we're looking at.
Great. And Natalie, building on that question, what are some of the key things that we can or should do to build that confidence and leadership and the ability for young people or young girls to feel like they can share those voices, particularly within cultures or communities where that perhaps is challenged more often by the community standings?
I'm so sorry, I lost you for a second. Could you repeat it again?
Sure. I basically said, what is it that we can do, or what are the key things we should think about to build the confidence and the leadership of young girls or young people so that they can feel free to share their voices in the way that Sarojini has mentioned?
Right. She's definitely raised important points. One of the things that we have seen is creating safe spaces for girls in the villages that we work in, for example, in our organization. And also what even the Youth Power Panel is doing right now is mobilizing young people to be able to understand that they have a huge stake in development, and it's upon them to hold leaders accountable. It's upon them to drive the agenda forward. So those are, for me, one of the ways that we can be able to adopt some of the alternatives that are just building up on what Sarojini shared. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to go with one final question to each of you. If you could give one tip or one piece of advice to everybody on the call today about what we can do to drive forward gender inequality that you've not covered already through what you've shared, what would that be? So Gemma, I'm going to come to you first.
I'd share the key lesson I've taken away from my recent experiences, which is to talk about it to whoever you can, because what you realise is it sparks a chain reaction when you either meet others who've been in the same situation where they've come into some sort of inequality, or it raises awareness of people who are sitting on the other side and weren't aware that that was happening. So that sharing is key.
Great. Sarojini, next.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Gemma and say maybe on the other side of that is listen. There's so many people that are talking, and there's so many people that want to share their experiences. I think it's important to listen and to really be conscious of what you're consuming, and like the dialogues and the narratives that you're consuming and how you're consuming them and what they can contribute to.
Great, fantastic. And last but not least, Natalie.
The danger of being the last one is that all the amazing things have been said. So
I agree.
So I will reflect on one of the people I look up to, and one of the things that she shared with me, she's also my mentor. She said that as an activist, when you are in spaces, don't ever go by yourself. Always carry an extra chair. Always open up the door to somebody else. So that's the same thing I would like to leave us all with. You're only one person, or you're only one organization. You cannot change is only possible when you all come together. So in every space that we are part of, or if you're able to bring somebody else, please do. If you're able to bring an extra chair, if you're able to just pass the mic to somebody else, we always need to do that. And on top of listening, and also just, on top of listening to other people instead of being the ones to always speak, that's also really important.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. To summarize there, I think there's a key importance in terms of the importance of talking about these issues, sharing, engaging, and listening to what people are saying, making sure their views are valued and heard. And finally, recognizing that actually this is absolutely a collective effort. Gender equality across society and across every community is not going to be anything that any one of us individually can solve, but actually collectively, we absolutely have the power to drive that forward. I've loved the conversation today and feel really honoured to have been able to be part of it. So massive thank you from me to our panellists. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Holly.
Thank you, Edleen. Yeah, I just wanted to finish off by saying thank you everyone for joining us today. It was really great to have so many of you on the call, joining from all different parts of the world. I hope you all found it interesting and insightful. If you did have any questions about anything that you've heard today, or just want to know a bit more about Restless Development, you can email me at hollyk@restlessdevelopment.org. And of course, a huge thank you to our wonderful host, Edleen, and also our brilliant three speakers, Gemma, Sarojini and Natalie, who all provided such a different perspective and point of view and experience on how we can achieve gender equality. Obviously, it's International Women's Day on Monday. I hope you all have a great day. Keep your eyes peeled on Restless Development socials, because we'll have lots of really exciting things going on. And yeah, thank you everyone again, and have a lovely weekend.